My husband wanted to set me up after 5 years of working together in the same company to get a promotion. I never imagined that after 5 years of working alongside my husband, the person I trusted the most would be the one to try and tear me down. But life has a funny way of revealing a person's true character when you least expect it. It all started when we both got hired at the same company. We were young, eager, and in love, ready to conquer the corporate world together. At first, everything was perfect. We had each other's backs, celebrated small victories, and spent our lunch breaks dreaming about the future. But as the years passed, something began to change. My husband, Daniel, had always been ambitious, but his ambition turned into something different, something darker. I didn't notice it at first. He started staying late at work, taking on extra projects, and getting closer to upper management. I admired his dedication, unaware that his newfound work ethic had less to do with the company and more to do with outshining me. Despite working just as hard, if not harder, I often found my contributions overlooked. I didn't mind, though. I believed in teamwork, in lifting each other up, and I thought Daniel did too. But he had other plans. The first real sign of trouble came during a team meeting. I had spent weeks preparing a proposal, pouring my energy into every detail. It was my best work yet, and I was excited to present it. Just as I was about to speak, Daniel casually took over. "And that's why we believe this is the best course of action," he concluded, closing my presentation with a smile. "We." As if he had played an equal role in creating the proposal. I was stunned. The room erupted in applause, and our boss commended Daniel for his brilliant strategy. He gave me a polite nod, barely acknowledging my presence. I wanted to believe it was an accident, a misunderstanding. That night, I confronted Daniel about it. "You took credit for my work," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not a big deal. We're a team, remember? What's mine is yours. But I did all the work." "Look, I needed this win," he said dismissively. "You'll get your turn." That was the moment I realized Daniel saw me not as a partner, but as competition. I should have walked away then. But I stayed. For the next year, he kept undermining me. Whenever I had a good idea, he was the one who presented it first. If I voiced concerns in meetings, he would contradict me, making me seem like I didn't know what I was talking about. My confidence wavered, but I refused to let him break me. And then, the ultimate betrayal happened. One morning, I was called into our boss's office. Daniel was already there, sitting with an expression of forced concern. "Is there a problem?" I asked, taking a seat. Our boss folded his hands. "We've received complaints about your performance." I blinked. "Complaints?" Daniel sighed dramatically. "I didn't want to bring this up, but there have been concerns about your ability to keep up with the team's expectations." The air left my lungs. "Are you saying?" "The company is considering termination," my boss said bluntly. I turned to Daniel, searching his face for any sign of regret, but all I saw was a carefully curated mask of sympathy. He had set me up. My own husband had orchestrated my downfall. What he didn't know, though, was that I wasn't going down without a fight. I sat in that office, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Daniel looked at me with that same practiced, sympathetic expression. The same man who kissed me goodbye every morning, who whispered promises of a future built together, was now sitting across from me, watching as our boss laid out reasons for my possible termination, reasons I knew weren't true. "I don't understand," I said finally, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I've met every deadline, exceeded my performance targets, and my work has always been highly rated in reviews. What complaints are you referring to?" Our boss, Mr. Hayes, exchanged a glance with Daniel. "There have been concerns about missed deadlines." "I haven't missed a single one." "And team morale. Some feel that you've been difficult to work with." "Difficult?" My breath caught in my throat. I'd always prided myself on being a team player, on supporting my colleagues. The only person I'd ever had conflict with was. I turned to Daniel, realization dawning like a slap across the face. This was him. I wanted to scream, to demand to know how he could betray me like this. But instead, I clenched my fists under the desk and forced myself to think. Stay calm. Stay logical. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like to know exactly who made these complaints," I said, keeping my voice measured. Because this is the first time I'm hearing any of this. Mr. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I can't disclose specific names. Then I'd like to see documentation, I interrupted. Surely there are emails or HR reports detailing these so-called concerns? Daniel's posture stiffened. He hadn't expected me to fight back. Mr. Hayes sighed. We take all complaints seriously. If there's an issue, we have to address it. Absolutely, I agreed. But shouldn't I be given a chance to respond? To provide evidence that contradicts these claims? Mr. Hayes hesitated, and I knew I had found a crack. He wasn't entirely convinced. Why don't we schedule a formal review? I suggested. Give me a chance to prove that these concerns are unfounded. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the situation. I don't think that's necessary, he cut in smoothly. We don't want to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I turned to Mr. Hayes. I do. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Mr. Hayes nodded. That seems fair. I'll set up a review meeting with HR. Until then, I expect full cooperation from both of you. I didn't miss the flicker of irritation in Daniel's eyes. I had bought myself time. The moment I stepped out of the office, I went straight to my desk. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to focus. If Daniel had really set me up, there had to be proof. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly, going through every email, every project file, every record of communication. And the more I looked, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had been building this case against me for months. Emails where he subtly implied I had forgotten key tasks he had conveniently taken over. Project updates where he mentioned having to correct my work, even though nothing had been wrong. Meetings where he had strategically positioned himself as the leader, making it seem like I was struggling. He had been rewriting reality, twisting the narrative until it painted me as incompetent. But he had made one crucial mistake, he underestimated me. I gathered my own proof. Every completed project, every successful deadline, every email that contradicted his claims. I documented everything and backed it up with timestamps. By the time the HR meeting arrived, I was ready. The conference room was tense when I walked in. HR representatives sat on one side of the table, Mr. Hayes at the head, and Daniel on the other end. He barely looked at me. Let's begin, Mr. Hayes said. We're here to discuss the performance concerns regarding. Actually, I interrupted, sliding a thick folder onto the table, I'd like to discuss some concerns of my own. Daniel's head snapped up. I turned to the HR manager. I have evidence that directly contradicts the complaints filed against me. I'd like to go through it. The next 30 minutes were some of the most satisfying of my life. I walked them through every false claim, presenting emails, project records, and timestamps that disproved every lie Daniel had spread. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from his face. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Mr. Hayes looked at Daniel. Do you have anything to say? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no excuse. HR took over. This is a serious breach of workplace ethics. We will need to conduct an internal review regarding these falsified complaints. Mr. Hayes nodded. For now, I see no reason for any action to be taken against you, he said to me. Relief flooded through me. I had won. But the best part? Daniel had dug his own grave. And he had no idea just how much worse it was going to get. Daniel sat in stunned silence, his usual smug confidence gone. I had just dismantled his entire scheme in front of HR, Mr. Hayes, and the company's leadership. For the first time in years, I saw something new in his expression, fear. He knew he was cornered. We'll need to review this further, the HR manager said, flipping through the documents I had provided. Falsifying performance complaints is a serious offense. We'll be conducting an internal investigation. Mr. Hayes nodded in agreement. Until then, I expect professionalism from everyone involved. He looked directly at Daniel when he said it. Daniel nodded stiffly, but I could see his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. This wasn't how he had planned for things to go. The meeting adjourned, and I walked out of that conference room with my head held high. Daniel, on the other hand, lingered behind, no doubt trying to figure out how to salvage the mess he had created. But I wasn't done with him yet. That evening, I arrived home to find Daniel already there, sitting on the couch, nursing a glass of whiskey. "You humiliated me today," he said without looking at me. I dropped my bag by the door and crossed my arms. "You did that to yourself." His jaw tightened. "You couldn't just let it go, could you? You had to turn it into a spectacle." I scoffed. "Let it go? You tried to get me fired, Daniel. My own husband." He finally looked at me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. "I was just trying to get ahead," he muttered. "You know how competitive this company is." "Competitive?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You didn't compete, Daniel. You cheated. You lied. You stabbed me in the back." He swirled the whiskey in his glass, his gaze distant. "I didn't think they'd take it that seriously." "That's your problem," I snapped. "You never think about consequences. You just assume you can manipulate your way out of anything." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. "So what happens now?" I stared at him, feeling something shift inside me. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know I don't trust you anymore." He flinched, like the words had physically hurt him. "Good." The next few weeks at work were tense. The HR department conducted a full investigation, interviewing colleagues, combing through emails, and verifying every claim. It didn't take long for them to find more evidence of Daniel's manipulation. It turned out I wasn't the only one he had thrown under the bus. A few former employees came forward with similar stories, how Daniel had spread false information, taken credit for other people's work, and strategically positioned himself for promotions. By the end of the month, the verdict was in. Daniel was fired. I found out when Mr. Hayes called me into his office. "We've concluded our investigation," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "And we've terminated Daniel's employment, effective immediately." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I see. I want to personally apologize for how this was handled," he continued. "It should never have escalated to this point." I nodded. "Thank you." There was a pause before he added, "We'd actually like to offer you a promotion. Your leadership and professionalism during this situation have been commendable." A promotion. The very thing Daniel had tried to steal from me. I accepted, of course. When I got home that night, Daniel was already packing his things. He didn't look up when I walked in. "I figured this was coming," he said, shoving clothes into a suitcase. I leaned against the doorway. "You did this to yourself." He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment before turning to face me. "Do you really think this is the end for me?" I tilted my head. "I think this is the end for us." His expression hardened. "You're serious?" I nodded. "I deserve better than someone who sees me as competition instead of a partner." He stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I guess I always knew you were stronger than me." I didn't respond. A few hours later, he was gone. I wasn't sad. Not really. Maybe a part of me mourned the idea of what we used to be, the dream we once had of conquering the corporate world together. But Daniel had made his choice. And I had made mine. I went to work the next day, stepping into my new role with confidence. I had fought for my place, earned it through hard work and resilience. Daniel thought he had set me up to fail. But in the end, he had only set himself up. And I thrived. The morning after Daniel left, I woke up in an apartment that suddenly felt much bigger, much quieter, and much more peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up feeling the weight of someone else's ambitions pressing down on me. No more second-guessing my every move, no more walking on eggshells around a man who had seen me as competition rather than a partner. I got ready for work with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. My promotion was more than just a step forward in my career, it was proof that I had been capable all along. It was proof that I hadn't needed Daniel, that he had needed me, and that he had tried to eliminate me the moment I became a threat to his success. But what he hadn't realized, what he had never understood, was that I was never going to let someone like him define my worth. Daniel's downfall didn't end with his termination. The news of his firing spread through the company quickly. Whispers filled the hallways, and I couldn't walk into the break room without hearing bits and pieces of hushed conversations. Some people were shocked, others, not so much. I always knew something was off about him, one coworker told me. He had a way of making himself seem like the perfect employee, but if you looked closer, you could see the cracks. Another former employee, someone Daniel had subtly pushed out months ago, reached out to me on LinkedIn. "Thank you," she wrote, "for exposing him. I thought I was crazy for suspecting what he was doing to me, but now I realize I wasn't alone." The more I listened, the more I realized just how many people Daniel had manipulated, just how many careers he had quietly sabotaged to get ahead. I had been his biggest obstacle, but I wasn't his only victim. And outside of work? Things weren't going any better for him. Daniel had assumed he would bounce back quickly. That with his polished resume and charming personality, he'd have no trouble finding a new job. But what he failed to consider was that corporate circles are small. Word travels fast. And when hiring managers reached out to their connections that included Mr. Hayes, his history caught up with him. No company wanted to take a risk on a man who had been fired for sabotaging his own wife. 2 months after Daniel's departure, I ran into him at a coffee shop. At first, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident, put-together man I had once known was gone. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his hair messier than usual, and there were faint circles under his eyes. He looked like someone who had spent the last few months struggling, someone who had been hit hard by the consequences of his own choices. He noticed me at the same time and hesitated before speaking. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. I nodded but didn't say anything. "You look good," he added awkwardly. I tilted my head. "I am." He exhaled a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah, I figured." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was thick, not with anger, but with something else, something heavier. Regret. "Listen," he said, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I know I messed up. I didn't think. I didn't realize how bad it would get." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't realize there would be consequences?" He let out another bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I thought I was playing the game. I thought. I don't know, that if I positioned myself right, things would work out." I crossed my arms. "And what, exactly, did you think was going to happen to me?" He swallowed. "I guess. I didn't think that far ahead. That was the problem, wasn't it?" He had never thought past his own ambition. He had never considered what would happen when his lies caught up to him. "I really did love you," he said suddenly, his voice softer now. I didn't flinch. I didn't react at all. I just looked at him, this man I had once thought I would build a future with, and I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just emptiness. "Maybe you did," I said. "But not enough." His jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. I picked up my coffee, ready to leave. Before I walked away, I looked at him one last time. "I hope you figure yourself out, Daniel. But I'm done being part of your story." And with that, I left him standing there, lost in the mess he had created. In the months that followed, I thrived. My new position challenged me in all the right ways. I led projects that I was proud of, built strong connections with my colleagues, and finally felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. And more than anything, I was free. Free from the doubt Daniel had instilled in me. Free from the constant battle for recognition. Free to succeed on my own terms. I bought a new apartment, not because I had to, but because I wanted a fresh start. A place that was entirely mine, untouched by the past. One evening, as I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, I thought about everything that had happened. About how Daniel had tried to take everything from me, my career, my confidence, my future. But in the end, the only person he had destroyed was himself. And me? I had never been stronger. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.